I'd like to call this meeting of the Greensburg City Council to order and ask you to please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Dear Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for this beautiful day you bestowed upon us. We've asked that you watch over us and guide us in the direction you want in this decision-making process this evening, and look after each and every one of our citizens of this community and keep them in your care. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. All council members are present. We have a quorum. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
No.
I would entertain a motion then to approve the agenda as written.
So moved. Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to approve the agenda. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Our mayor is on vacation today. I hope he's got his toes dangling in Table Rock Lake about now. So, council member reports.
I'd just like to say thank you to Christy for the new report on the boards and commissions. That's very helpful, and I like the additional information that you added onto that list for us.
Any other reports? City Administrator.
I have a few items. I'd like to begin by saying that we welcomed Congressman Mike Pompeo to town today. He didn't have enough time to do an in-depth tour, but he's promised me that he's going to make time on his schedule to come back and visit the big well and our hospital and schools, and just take some more time in town. I was able to accompany Congressman Pompeo in the downtown area at the courthouse and here at the city building, and I think he was pleased with the results of his trip here today. Included in your council packet is a copy of the note from Miss Ivy Swift, who represents the Olathe Garden and Civic Club. They were interested in donating $200, or basically donate a tree to the city of Greensburg. We worked with the Olathe Garden and Civic Club. Miss Pat Worth had gone out to Southwest Nurseries, or was it Johnson? I just drew a blank. Southwest Nurseries and picked up a tree for us that's going to be placed at Sunset Park. So I'd just like to thank Miss Ivy for that donation, and our tree board for assisting us in that process. Also in your packet is a copy of a letter from Miss Stacy Crum. She's the treasurer of the City Clerk and Municipal Finance Officers Association. The letters informed us that Christy Pyatt has been awarded a scholarship for this year's clerk's training that's going to be conducted in November. So we're very pleased, and congratulations to Christy for being able to obtain that scholarship. For this topic, I'd like to draw council's attention to an article, a letter to the editor that was in the paper October 10th, 2012. In this letter to the editor, the article draws attention to 4 different areas of town that Norman and Marcia Unruh of Greensburg had wanted to draw our attention to. I'll first begin by saying that if they've had any contact with the city in any capacity, I haven't yet spoken with them about this. I'd like to be able to at least comment on the 4 areas. The first topic was the plants that we've discussed here in open council before, the purple sage that's located in the planter boxes. Council member Trummel had brought that up in an open meeting. I've worked with staff, and it's Mike Hayes' intent and his crew's intent to pare those plants back. Mike's doing some research now to find out exactly how much we can pare that back without damaging those plants. So staff is following up on that particular topic. The second item of discussion in the article was the planter boxes on North Main near the post office. Staff has also taken some time to begin to look at those planter boxes quite some time back. I think that problem of the planter boxes is directly tied to an ongoing concern that the city has between the city and BNIM with the irrigation system that doesn't work. But it is a topic that we are addressing as far as city staff, and some discussion will be ongoing in the coming weeks with council as to the best way to remediate those boxes. I've been in contact with private vendors to begin a pricing concept to see what it would cost to put the metal grates over there. They're quite attractive if done well. In fact, we have some metal grates over some spots directly to the south of the incubator building where the trees have died. But those metal grates are still there and they look very attractive. There's just no tree in the center of it. But in the coming weeks, I will be bringing some topics to council to get council's guidance on exactly which boxes we want to attempt to remediate the quickest. There's going to be a cost associated with fixing even one of those planter boxes. Public Works, I'm going to request that they get me an accurate price, or staff to give me an accurate price of what fill dirt would cost. But if we were to simply backfill those holes, it would kill the tree. It would rob the tree of needed oxygen, and the tree would then die. There's got to be better ways to fix that, but I want to remind council that one of the things that is a concern is ongoing necessary discussions with BNIM to see what they can help us do, if anything, to remediate the irrigation system that doesn't work. So that is a topic discussed in the article that the city is aware of, and attempting to take some steps to remediate that problem. The third topic discussed basement holes in town where wildlife can potentially gather. As council is well aware, we've also begun an abatement process, and we are addressing some of these basement holes. The actual required expenditure for that is problematic in that we can't address every basement hole in one given year. I think the cost would be prohibitive of that. We could certainly begin a process and send a notice to every owner in the hopes that they would fix their properties themselves, but the assumption has to be made that the city would end up invariably needing to cover the cost of that abatement process. But that is a topic that will continue to be discussed between staff and council. And the last topic was something I was unaware of until I read the newspaper article. The article talked about a sewage tank on Mr. Hewitt's property that's not capped. I've spoken to Mick Kendall about that, and Mick assures me that staff can begin to take care of that through working with Mr. Hewitt. So I hope to be able to report soon that that is no longer a problem. One of the challenges I think in that is that if it is a sewage tank and there's no danger of it leaking, I'm not sure we have a situation that falls into the category of abatement. I think if it's an uncapped sewer tank, I think we could certainly require the owner to cap that, but I'm not quite so sure at this point that we could require them to remove it if there's no danger of it leaking. Council, that's all the comments that I have.
I have a question on that, Ed. In a case like that, is there a tank in there, or have they tapped the city sewer? There is a tank?
I believe there's a tank.
Do you think so?
Well, Miss Pam, for example, tells me it's a sewer.
In either instance, whether there is a tank or they've tapped the city sewer, where is it the city's responsibility to go on private property and take care of something such as that? I mean, I'm asking.
We don't have a responsibility unless it becomes a health hazard. And under our health code, I believe we have the ability to do an abatement. If it's an emergency situation, we can immediately take care of it. I'm not quite so sure it would be an emergency in this case.
Don't we have to approach the property owner first and see if they will take care of the problem first?
Yes, and I'll defer to the city attorney. I believe we have absolutely a responsibility to see if the homeowner would take care of that, or the property owner would alleviate that concern initially.
This is a septic system in an area where there wasn't sewer at one time or something?
See, that's what I'm asking. Are they tapped into the city sewer where there was a home there, or is there actually sewage tank in place.
They had a camping trailer parked there for a little while. I don't know which way they did it.
Yeah.
The line that's sticking up is pretty close to the front of the property, so it may be that it's tapped into the sewer, but it had investigated it.
That's really, jurisdictionally, it's a KDHE issue, but most counties have adopted a sanitary code, sanitation code, and I assume Cuyahoga County has one, and they're responsible for the enforcement of that as it relates to those kind of systems, even in the city. So it may be, and the county health department. So maybe they would have some issues there too if there's a sewer system that's not up to code, not up to state specifications or the county code. Usually the county adopts kind of what the state requires as minimum standards. At some point they get grandfathered in if they're old ones, but if they ever have to redo them or replace them, they have to upgrade them to modern standards. So probably just more investigation to just really find out what's going on.
Right, and Mick is going to get back with me to tell me what the status of this alleged tank is. I'm not sure, so I'll follow up with Mick, and we can definitely take some steps to see if we can alleviate a problem if there is one.
Matt, do you know who does the code here? Or if they have one?
No, I do not know that.
Yeah.
So.
I'd say the health nurse so you talk to first.
I don't know if the health department handles anything like that. I'd probably talk to county attorney just to see what ordinances the county has on the books, if they do have the state standard adopted.
Yeah, the county councilor, Don
Hayes.
out of Dodge.
Ed, on the purple sage issue, I believe we have about a dozen master gardeners here in town. Is Mike thinking about contacting some of them to get some information on that? Would be a local resource.
It's an excellent point. I know Mike has done some research online, and we had the benefit of talking to some master gardeners in here at the end of a council meeting about the purple sage. And the information we were provided there on an impromptu basis was you can trim it back in the spring, you can cut it way back in the fall. Well, we're in the fall now with a plant that is blocking visual access around the corners. And we have other city staff that's volunteered to help out there. For example, Christy and Stacy have volunteered to go help Mike's crew to see if we can alleviate that problem fairly quickly. But I don't want to damage the plants by just reacting. We need good guidance, and that's an excellent point to talk to our master gardeners.
I believe that they need to do some type of education every year, some education program, so that might, fall in helping the city out in that respect.
We have some of that same plant at our house, and it dies doesn't completely die.
Goes dormant.
Dormant in the fall. And the property owner at our place will trim it back. But each year, that plant gets bigger. So that's something to plan on too. You may have to go in and cut it in the spring. Hopefully that's possible. We can find out from people maybe that Eric is talking about.
Remove some of the base potentially.
Yes, and keep it kind of a small type plant that it'll only get bigger.
Right, and at some point, council, we may want to examine putting a different plant in there that we can have an easier time to maintain. These are large plants.
I think it fits our streetscape very well.
And apparently they don't need a lot of water.
There is.
Well, it must be a family of the sagebrush or something. Okay. Any other questions for city administrator? If not, I want to welcome you all for coming to our meeting tonight, and we're to our public comment section. Patrick?
Thank you, guys. So I'm just making this comment not as a representative of the newspaper, but as a resident. I'd really like to see the numbers removed from the cityscape. I did mention it to Ed a number of weeks back, the numbers on the concrete. I love the Main Street. I love that I work on Main Street, but it looks like a flea market parking lot out there.
Oh, is that?
They're big, bright numbers. They're all up and on the street. And
You're talking from our Arts and Crafts Fair.
yeah, from the Arts and Crafts Fair, yeah. And I know that it was important to designate spots where people were going to go, but I was under the impression at that time that they would be temporary. So, I mean, they seem kind of like an eyesore. So, again, that's just my personal, that's a resident's opinion, not the newspaper. So.
Thank you. Next is our consent agenda, which is the minutes of the council meeting of October the 1st, appropriation ordinance 1890, and the cereal malt beverage license for Quick Shop Incorporated for your consideration.
Council, I'll draw your attention to your copy of page 1 of 3 of that application for license to sell cereal malt beverage. The city attorney had pointed it out to me that on the very top of that page, where the applicant has the ability to check city or county, they checked county. When I spoke to a representative from Quick Shops at their corporate office in Hutchinson, they acted like they do that all the time, but she was okay with the idea that she would go ahead and correct that for us and send it to us. So we do have a corrected copy that does say City of Greensburg instead of Kiowa County.
Okay.
The state law says if it's out in the county, then the county commission approves the application. If it's in the city limits, and the city does it. So they probably have a form so they can mark wherever they are. They probably just got in the habit of doing one.
Make a motion, we approve the application for cereal malt beverages for Quick Shop.
Rex, is that your motion to approve the whole consent agenda?
The whole consent agenda, yes.
There you go.
You want to restate that, or you want to?
Make a motion, we approve the consent agenda, including the cereal malt beverage license for Quick Shop.
Ordinance 1890.
Yeah.
And
That's all
appropriation
involved.
ordinance
It's
number
involved.
1890.
I'll second that.
Motion's been made and seconded to approve the consent agenda of the minutes of October 1, appropriation order 1890, and the cereal malt beverage license for Quick Shop. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Our first item of business tonight, Ed, is a contract with PEC.
Council, included in your packet is a copy of the contract for city engineer services from PEC. And we've spoken about a possible contract with PEC at a previous public meeting. That provided quickly as the background to that, from October 2008 to September 2011, the city did have a contract with PEC to provide city engineering services. Now, it's my understanding that that was a requirement of all of the assistance that the city had received from KDEM and FEMA. They felt it necessary or required us at that time to have a city engineer that would help us oversee the sheer numbers of contracts that or projects that the city was undergoing at that time. I've confirmed with PEC and provided some documentation that there is no retainer fee for PEC to be our city engineer, and it does not require us to select PEC if we chose to go with another engineering firm for any project in the future. It merely gives us the option of choosing PEC if we so desired, to be able to use PEC's engineering service either on a one-time basis for any project, or to choose them as our engineering firm for any future project. So it merely gives us some additional options as we move forward on a project. For example, Davis Park, we would be able to choose to go forward with PEC, or we could use them in a capacity of quality checking any information we were getting from any other sector. But it does provide us with an option of being able to choose PEC in this regard, for example, Davis Park, to be able to save time as we move forward on that.
Is this an annual contract?
I believe this is going to be written the same as the previous one, and let me look at that real quick. It should be for a one-year time frame with 2 one-year extensions to the contract should neither party choose to exit the contract at that time. Let me see.
I was thinking there was an out.
This is pretty much the same generic contract we've been using with them on these other projects.
From the areas that I checked earlier, it's exactly the same, but they have included a new fee schedule that's at the backside of this contract. Let me find that for you, council. I've missed it.
What 3B has the either part of the
That's what I thought it had in there. Couldn't find it again.
It's 3B.
Which one, Chris?
3B.
B?
B is in boy.
I'm not seeing it.
It's on page 6.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it because I got 2 3s in there. Page 5's got a 3
That's
also.
true.
Those tricky engineers.
And we don't legally have to have a city engineer.
No, we don't. Not at this time.
Some of these projects, if you don't have somebody as your contractor, you have to go out and bid them. You would have to go out and put out bids for an engineer on some of these projects if you don't have a designated city engineer. So that might be a difference.
But on our Davis Park deal, we're gonna have to have an engineer. Either way, correct?
Either way.
That's what KDOT is requesting.
Right, and what KDOT has relayed to me is, and this is where I say we have some options. KDOT has said that they're okay if we have a city engineer to simply go forward with that engineer to provide third-party independent numbers for the cost to replace the park, as well as going forward with the work of the project itself. Now, as I mentioned to council earlier at our last public meeting, and Councilmember Goodman had questioned this, and I think the answer that we had come up with that night, the fact is, it was questioned, why would we need, if we had PEC or any firm come up with third-party numbers, why would KDOT want us to go forward with that same company? In speaking to Rob Stork, he's endorsed the answer that Councilmember Trummel had come up with that night, that if you invest a certain amount of money with a company that begins that process, they would be in essence doubling their money if they had a brand new company after the numbers have been submitted to KDOT weigh in on that process. So it is a cost-saving measure that they're asking that whomever we begin a process with to arrive at those independent third-party numbers be the same company that we choose to go forward with on the Davis Park project.
What I was getting at though too is we're gonna pay an engineering firm, whether it's PEC or anybody.
Right.
So.
I think it's beneficial to the city to have an engineer on retainer where you're not having to pay them any monthly. You know, it's an as-used cost, especially where you have PEC that's so familiar with all of the facilities.
Infrastructure.
So that you know, when the city has an issue, they can call somebody up that's already familiar with it. You don't have to go through a lot of vetting process and education process. They can answer a question in a half hour that might take you 3 weeks to get an answer if you didn't have somebody like that working for you. So and where you can get out of it anytime you want to, it's a pretty good arrangement, looks to me like.
I suppose I can see that if we don't have to use them for any projects. I think they get a little complacent on our attention to detail on our inspections. I would want to take bids on a project.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that gets down to the question about which firm or engineer do you want to hire to be city engineer, not necessarily do you want to have a contract with an engineer. And we talked, I mean, I think PEC has generally probably done a pretty good job. Probably some things that could have gone better maybe.
The only thing we're doing tonight, though, is just considering naming PEC as the official city engineer.
Yes, ma'am.
And that is so that they can go ahead and start with the independent number or what KDOT wants for the park, is that correct?
That's correct. However, and this may be an oversight on my part, I should have had a second order of business tucked directly in there behind it saying, okay, now we have a city engineer. Do we want to go forward with PEC to do that third-party independent numbering? And in essence, accepting them as our city engineer on the project itself. And I think we need a little time as I continue to work with KDOT to be able to put that in front of council.
I think we need a little more time, just once we do, assuming we do establish them as city engineer, we probably need a proposal from PEC as what their fee would be to establish that cost estimate. And again, eventually, yeah, it will be KDOT footing the bill, but they'll have to approve that expenditure, make sure it's in line. I'm sure it will be, but just formalities we need to go through before officially giving the green light to that estimate project.
Very good.
So the only thing we're doing tonight is considering PEC as the official city engineer.
That's right.
You're not spending any money tonight doing that.
Not yet.
It's my opinion, and maybe I'm wrong here, but if we select PEC as city engineer to go forward with this on the Davis Park deal, I feel like we ought to sit down and visit with them a little bit on a couple of the projects here that they finished, like our street rebuilding project. I feel like there's a lot of places that they missed the boat on. I mean, Spruce Street coming off of the highway, I can't believe that they left it in the shape that they did.
There's no inspectors out on the punch list.
Well, the inspector was with Hefts though every day, I thought.
On the original deal.
Is that correct?
Not on the redos. They weren't out there because I went and hunted for them 2 or 3 times and got with the mayor and we called them.
So, I just feel like if we do select them, maybe we need to sit down with them and say, listen, let's just don't give this thing a one-time through shot and call it good. I mean, we're paying you to do this. Let's do it right. Or be thorough about it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I guess I may have a misunderstanding of what their role was during that time. As our city engineer, they were responsible for examining the build documents to approve those as to content. And I think they took it another step further than that and were physically on scene for a lot of this, but they weren't completely on task for the process of the building.
But I thought, like on our street repair, they went in and inspected all the streets and were in the decision-making process of which streets and to what extent they got repaired. Am I right or wrong on that, Christy?
Yeah, I think that was the difference between streets and streetscape.
Yes.
Because on streetscape, that's exactly what you're talking about. And I think it went a little bit further on the actual street project because they did have an inspector out here during the initial building phase.
Let me rephrase that. The street rebuilding project, not streetscape.
Okay.
Okay. So then are we saying that we want to table this tonight or? Or do you want to
comfortable moving forward. Again, we're at pretty much zero risk here. It's no obligation to either party, and it maybe does get the ball rolling on Davis Park, the Davis Park relocation, but by the same token, it's probably not something that's super urgent that can't wait another couple of weeks too. So, I'd be comfortable moving forward today, but if the rest of council has reservations.
And council, it would be my intent at our next council meeting to invite a representative or representatives from PEC down here to discuss Davis Park. If council felt like they wanted to hold off on this contract for now, we could correct some of the typos, for example. There's 2 Section 3s. This is a zero risk. It is, I think, a good step for Greensburg, and it doesn't tie our hands on Davis Park. But like I say, council, it would be my intent to invite them down here to have that open meeting discussion about what their intent is if we did request that they provide those third-party numbers. That is a big step, and I'd certainly rather have them here for that.
But we could use them for the third-party numbers, and then if we so chose to do so, we could walk away and find another engineer to do our park rebuilding project.
Certainly could.
The only concern I would have there is we may be, again, up to this point, KDOT said that they would be happy to foot the bill for those engineering services, but again, if we do switch gears midstream, we may have to pay some of that out of pocket.
I understand that. I just wanted to have all the options in place and
have options.
okay. I believe it's up to the council then to decide what they want to do at this point then.
If Ed wants us to vote on just having a city engineering firm, and that's the end of it, I'll vote for that, but I don't want anything on the table for the third party or anything like that.
Till we can talk.
Again, that's what I kept asking. Are we just considering?
Are we committed to that, or is that what you're saying?
And this has
Are we
nothing to do with
just
Davis Park
considering
tonight.
naming-
It merely gives us an option to consider in the future.
As having an engineer on hand if we need him. Okay.
I'd make a motion we use PEC for the city engineering firm.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded to use professional engineering to provide services to the city of Greensburg.
And might add, and to approve the agreement and authorize, I guess, the mayor to sign it.
Right.
And approve the agreement.
And approve the contract
Second.
with typos corrected.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item B.
Council, I had previously provided you with some supporting documents, and I brought them again with me this evening, showing a 2012 budget, a projected budget for a police department, showing a 2013 projected budget for the police department. I will add that there will be some additional numbers for 2012. Assisted by Ms. Pam today, I'm able to confirm, I didn't know this process. In the past, we've taken animals to Dodge City to the Humane Society, where they would then maintain the animal until it was euthanized. It's a requirement from that process that we can't immediately take the animal to the Humane Society in Dodge City. It's not their responsibility to maintain the animal for the first 3 days that are required by statute. That's our responsibility. So the cost would be increased for 2012 requested expenditures to be able to encompass a process to establish a pound. And although we do have a pound located out by the sewer lagoons, I think to take that animal impound lot and refurbish it and get it to code, a $200 fee payable to the state as another required expenditure. I think requiring city staff to go out there on a daily basis, should there be any animals there, I think that carries with it an additional cost to refurbish what we already have. It would be my suggestion, and it's not a showstopper, unless council tells me it is, it would be my suggestion that I work with Mike and Mick, Mike Hayes and Mick Kendall, to see if we have a better facility or a location for a facility either in Public Works or potentially directly to the north of the Public Works building on the section of property that was recently owned by Doc Skaggs. There are some options there that bring that in closer so that we can monitor that in a better fashion. I think as the 2012 budget is proposed, I think it has enough leeway in there to be able to afford to set that process up. And again, this is all a setup process that really wouldn't begin until 2013. But it would take a while to establish that, to have it inspected, to obtain our licensing for that facility. And then each animal that would be taken to Dodge City to the Humane Society would require a $37 expenditure. So there are some additional expenditures over and above what I've allotted for in the 2012 budget. However, I think in the 2013 budget, I think I padded it in an excessive amount. For example, it's my experience in an animal control capacity or supervising those who do that, roughly the cost from my past experience is really about $100 per animal for daily upkeep and euthanasia. So we're under that amount, I think, should we establish our own impound lot for animals. So that was the last piece of the real critical information that I needed, is how an animal control process could work. And I think I have satisfactory answers on that. If I can continue to work with Mick and Mike and establish a better facility than what we already have that's significantly farther away from the Public Works facility.
But they have to go out to the sewer lagoon about every day anyways, don't they? To check their...
They should be, to just check the facility.
And why doesn't ours fit code anymore? What? I know you said you have to have air conditioning for cats.
And heat, I think.
And heat?
Yeah, you gotta have a heated cat house.
And I think it would be a minimal expenditure to prep that and make it inspection ready. For example, all the materials on the fencing that provide shade, I think most of that material would have to be redone. So part of the problem is it's out of our sight most of the time. Makes it somewhat more difficult to patrol that and make sure that the animals are secure. So I think it's a better fit to have it in town if we can do it at a decent cost. But I would like to have the opportunity to examine both of those costs to see which one, first of all, is more cost effective, and second of all is more workable as far as continued daily maintenance of the animals that happen to be there.
If we were going to do it, I would rather see it
Out there.
at Public Works.
I wouldn't. For one, I wouldn't care. I'm far enough away from it, but the neighbors and the barking.
I understand that. That tape.
That would be the...
But I also know that if those animals are out there and they have something else they've got to do, they're not going to go out there.
But I think they have to go to the lift station every day.
Well, don't they go out there even on the weekends?
Yeah, I think they have to.
So that's,
We got
if we were to move
pumps
it,
on the sewer.
if we were to move it, I would prefer it down there. But if there's any way we can get that one out there to going, and they're going by it every day, then
Going by is one thing, but if they,
yeah.
They live there.
yeah. I guess I'm an animal advocate. I don't like them clear out there where you can't tell what's going to happen out there.
Well, and people have been known to go out there and break their animals out
Yes,
of
they
jail.
have done that. and-
Generally, the animals shouldn't be out there anyways. The supposed owners should be out there because they ain't taking care of their animals.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know, I agree.
I guess my preference would be, again, just to see cost comparison between refurbishing the existing facility versus the cost of moving it in town. In preference, all cost and everything else being equal, I'd probably prefer it being in town, just easier to work for employees, and again, just feels more secure for the animals. But again, just depends on the relative cost there. If it's going to be an extra $20,000 moving in town, well,
Sure.
maybe not.
I understand that. but-
That's why I was asking. I would like to know what it would take to bring ours up to code and why it's not able to pass right now.
I understand. And before that can be decided, I would present both sides of that scenario to council and ask for your guidance at that time. It's the cost of refurbishing what we already have would, in my opinion, be minimal. It would be significantly higher to put a cement slab in a new location, to put in some cyclone fencing and correct animal run or kennels. Something would have to be done for an air-conditioned space for cats, which I think that's a stick-built building out there. You know, quite possibly we can move that in fairly inexpensively, depending on the cost of the rest of a setup for an animal control or impoundment lot. My statement to council is that I would present both sides of that and ask for guidance at that time. So having said that, I think the animal control portion of that can be set up relatively inexpensively in its current location. We would still have to go through an inspection process. It's my understanding that Doc Skaggs has inspected our facility in the past, and his report goes to the state, and then at some point they have their own staff member come out and quality check that before a license is issued. So we've had that process before. It would have been my goal, if it was workable, to be able to just take the individual animals to Dodge City and be out of that business, but we have to provide a 3-day time frame so that an owner can come out and attempt to reclaim their animal in a local fashion. I can't send them to Dodge City.
What do the other small cities and what does the county do? What's the rest of the county do for their animals?
Mullinville has their own. And I don't know what it consists of.
I don't think the county has any ordinances pertaining to animals at large, so I don't.
They have state statutes.
Then I don't know.
Which primarily only encompasses things like vicious animals.
Usually, yeah, or rabid. Yeah.
Well, they would also have the obligation to see to the animal's welfare if they arrest the owner and no one is there to take care of the animal. So they would then have to take the animal to some facility somewhere. Future looks bright if we could ever get a full-time clinic here. Even a more active part-time clinic, I think, would work for our needs. Barring that, it would be necessary to run our own impound lot for animals.
We do have an ordinance for licensing animals, yes?
That's correct.
So if an owner were to pick up their animal and they weren't licensed, would they be required to license them before the animal was returned?
And or pay any necessary fees associated with housing the animal. It's typical in an animal impoundment situation to have a fee associated with the daily care and feeding of the animal.
We had that. Remember, it was a tiered deal. Remember,
It was
so much the first time we picked it up?
If they picked it up the first time, then it went, I think it was $100 the
Yeah.
first time, then it went to $200, and the third time was $300.
For an animal at large.
And the city used to, every year, over at the firehouse,
Yeah.
Doc Skaggs would come down there on a weekend, and you brought your animals down there, and you paid a fee, and you bought a city tag.
And you
Bought a tag and you got
Rabies,
immunization.
yes.
Yeah.
Council, this is another example of what gets measured gets done. I'm confident there are many, many people in town with animals that haven't gone to the necessary step to obtain a license. But once there is an animal control officer and a police officer who's able to monitor that, I think it provides that incentive for people to go ahead, because any animal can run at large. You know, our own animals. I mean, any animal would like to be out running loose and checking out the neighborhood. But once that animal is in contact with law enforcement or animal control, then we can have, I think, a reason, if you will, for an owner to obtain the $1 tag. I mean, our tags are very inexpensive here, and that doesn't provide the hindrance to registering an animal.
Well, if the animal has a tag on it and it's picked up at large somewhere and nobody knows whose it is, can't you go to the tag in the city and say, wait a minute, here's the number off this tag.
Even the
Joe
rabies
Blow
deal.
owns this dog, that's where we need to go.
Even a rabies tag, they can go.
Yeah.
And therein lies the point behind this entire process is a registration process that you can't register your animal unless you have current rabies vaccination. And I think it's a responsibility of every animal owner to have their animal vaccinated for rabies. Rabies is a very debilitating, sickness in an animal, and quite frankly, I mean, I knew some kids that had to get the series of shots because they were bit by an animal, that the animal ran away, was never caught, and the poor kid had to take the shots. So it's the rabies monitoring, I think, that's the key behind the registration process.
And I believe they've seen more cases of rabies in the last year here than they have.
Generally, it's the dogs you ain't got to worry about, it's the cats.
Cats are not monitored nearly as much as dogs because there's
Something that goes
a
along
dog,
with the cats too. It was brought up in the newspaper article. These are
Dogs?
basements.
The what?
The
Oh,
basements.
that are open?
Yeah. Not so much that some of them are open, some of them still have decks on them that are rotten, but your cats can still get inside.
So
Not to change the subject.
we're gonna have a dog catcher, or would that be the responsibility of a police officer before the police officer showed up in case it was a vicious animal, but if the city boys picked it up and took it out to the impound lot and all that?
Good comment. And what I envision is both an animal control officer and a police officer. With a police officer while on duty being able to take nearly every animal call out that comes out. Weekends or periods that the officer is not on, the process that I envision, and I can explain that a little more in depth on the budgeting process, an animal control officer who's primarily a volunteer, but they receive, which means they are a part-time employee, but it's someone who wants to volunteer to do that, who takes an animal control call out at a pay of $15 per call out, which provides them some incentive to be able to leave their home if the 911 dispatcher calls. Some thought would need to be put into what would be a reasonable amount of money to give that animal control officer for fuel each month as well, so that when they're taking 911 call outs for an animal at large, or a cow has gotten out in town and they're called out to assist with that, what would be a normal amount for that animal control officer to receive for gasoline? The animal control officer I worked with in the past received $15 per call out and $150 per month for gasoline. But I think their level of call outs was much higher than we can plan to expect. So in a budgeting process of roughly $100 per month for gas, and we'll continue to monitor that to see if that's too much or too little. I anticipate too much.
Tank of gas for a pickup.
Tank of gas, and that's only once a month. So,
And if you've got to go to Dodge.
well,
And are you going to pay them that gas allowance every month, even if they don't have a call out? What can you put a gas allowance on the call out?
Yeah, I mean, the amount of gas they use is probably going to be tied to how many times they're called out. So I'd rather, maybe bump up the amount per call out a little bit just to factor in fuel prices rather than just pay a flat fee every month
understand.
for gas. It just seems more fair.
And then if they have to go to Dodge with that dog or whatever it is, then
That'd be
we
another
go
call
accordingly.
out. That'd be another call out.
So much.
When we did our ambulance call outs, you had $15 for a call out. If you took a transfer to Wichita, you got 3 call outs. You had a rate that you followed, and I would think you could do the same thing with those.
And that's what I've done before on that as well. You can't, in an average call out, 20 minutes or something, that's a pretty good hourly rate. But if you're out there on the same cow scenario, but it's a herd, there's 8 cows running loose in town. We've got the deputies and the officer and the animal control officer, and they're out there for 3 hours. $15 is really kind of underpaid. So a lot of common sense and supervision injected into that too by the officer. Council, I presented a lot of information the other day. I wanted to follow up on the animal control portion of that because that was weak in my previous presentation. I just didn't have the information yet. Valid comments about whether they get a gas stipend each month or whether you adjust that into the number of call-outs. I appreciate that. Council, what I would ask is that we consider a Greensburg Police Department, and that council approve staff to move forward in advertising for a position. And I would appreciate having council involved in that selection process as well. For example, presentation of the applicant in an open council meeting, ask any number of questions, have concerns, please raise them. But this, I think, more than any other police position that I've ever hired for, this position is much more critical, because not only do we need someone that knows how to be a police officer, we need a strong administrator for the level of responsibilities that's going to come with this.
So we're going to have a dog catcher, we're going to have animal control officer, we're going to have a code enforcement officer, and we're going to have a police officer. Police officer's job, other than animal control, if the animal control person isn't there, is to do what?
I think if you have a police officer that's deeply involved in code enforcement, I think it can be questioned much more readily as far as.
I thought we had we were hiring a code enforcement.
Well, and code enforcement, building inspector,
yeah.
As a combined position. An animal control officer for those time periods when an officer is not available, and that would be my main intent. And a police officer to be able to enforce municipal code as well as criminal code. So I'm not quite sure what the question is.
Well,
Councilmember
my
Moore.
problem is you're wanting a full-time police officer. If we've got an animal control officer and we've got a code enforcement officer, we've got county law enforcement doing all the state statutes and all that. Essentially what the city guy would be doing is like street violations and maybe the highway, which I just don't think, I don't know if we can justify a full-time position. There's a lot, I don't think we're allowed enough money for it, for one thing, especially a setup. You know, you got vehicles, if we use vehicle blowed engines, have they got to be bonded? You know, the city pay for that. Is there special insurance for that? Is the health insurance higher for them because they are a police officer? Or just,
yes,
we're creating a whole new bureaucracy here. And I'm just not for sure we're ready for a full-time guy. If it's mostly the street deals, the county's wanting $15,000 a year for their dispatch services, for $15,000, if they'll enforce our street speed limits, I think we're money ahead. And I could care less about 54 highway. I think that should be the county or the state. I don't why anybody would want to stop a probable drug car or something that could be violent inside city limits is beyond me, because inside city limits ain't the place to have a gunfight. And I know it'd be rare, but it only takes one time. This is a pretty important issue for full-time.
I understand. I'm going to answer initially what I think I've heard some folks on city staff ask as well. For example, what are they going to do? What will a Greensburg police officer do? Everything that any other law enforcement officer can do, and then some. An active shooter at a church or a school, they're going to go to that. Stopping speeding cars, domestic violence, any kind of violation of law, this officer is expected to go to that. And I say, and more, because the contracts that we've had with the Sheriff's Department prior to this, they don't enforce municipal code. They're not comfortable doing that. It's not what they're trained to do. It's not their nature. It's not their background.
Which is another word for ordinances. Or
city ordinance, city code. Deputies will not enforce city code. I've had a very lengthy conversation with our sheriff, and I understand that background of a sheriff's department. They just don't have the desire to take on a municipality and enforce codes.
But we're wanting to hire a guy to do that, right?
Right. Now, are you speaking about the code enforcement officer?
Right.
Okay. Code enforcement officer can't write citations for left wheel to curb, for parking violations, for handicap parking violations, stopping speeding traffic through the school zone. And granted, our deputies can do all of the traffic violations. But there's 1 or 2 deputies on in any one given time in the county, maybe. And they have a large county to enforce violations in. Completely up to council. If you think my numbers are off, I'd certainly go back to the drawing board. And in all fairness to the budgetary process, I've already declared to council that the Sheriff's Department has an intent in 2014 to charge $15,000 for dispatch services. To take that one step further, if council chose to in the future, it would be, in my opinion, a positive step for officer safety and code enforcement and law enforcement if we had the ability and the funding to add 1 or 2 part-time officers that could help to cover while an officer's away on vacation or leave. So did the budget just go up $30,000 more? Potentially. Completely up to council what would be decided in the future if one officer was felt to not be adequate to the task. Because they'll be away for 40 hours of training a year. We're giving them the same number of vacation hours and sick hours that we give any other employees. So there's going to be periods when the city's not covered for municipal law enforcement. But the Sheriff's Department will always be there to take 911 calls and to send an officer out in case of some type of disorder. The difference is when they get there, they can't write any at-large tickets for animals, and they can't write any violation of municipal code. If it happens to be a state law violation, they can write it on their long forms or citations, but they will not enforce city code. There is a distinct difference between a code enforcement officer and a law enforcement officer. The code enforcement officer is going to be pretty much anything from the curb towards the property. The grass violation, or the vehicle that's parked on the side of the house that's leaking oil and gasoline onto the ground, contaminating groundwater. Anything that of a structure that's in disrepair that our abatement process can address. That's primarily what a code enforcement officer's job is. To work with us to prioritize and to ask council's assistance on an abatement process for the various properties that are in town that have open basements. That's what I envision our code enforcement officer doing by what their job description is.
Well, I think before we expected our county guys to do some of the ordinances too, and the animal control, and that isn't their job, like you said. Has anybody talked with them, if we do hire a code enforcement officer and an animal control officer, would they be interested in a contract from curb to curb? I'll go on with that first before I vote on anything. Because essentially that's what they're going to be doing. The other one, we're already paying taxes for county, for the state laws, your domestic disturbances and all that. But I'd just like to know before we start spending a whole bunch of money every year, and once we get started, it's going to be hard to stop.
You're talking like a traffic type contract with them.
Right. I don't even know if that's possible, but.
I think what might be helpful, I mean, so far, we have a lot of city ordinances which we've adopted, which to this point, we don't have a method of enforcing. And really, if we, again, kind of go through that list of ordinances we've adopted, say, example, the
golf cart,
ATV.
Yeah.
That's an example of, we paid staff time to develop that, for Gordon to actually drop an ordinance. But really, even though we've adopted it, it doesn't mean a whole lot because there's no means of enforcement. And actually just seeing kind of black and white what ordinances and codes we have on the books, which we, again, I would think we thought we had a good rationale for adopting those rules and regulations. And if we go to the trouble of adopting those regulations, we need a method of enforcement. So just kind of having that list of, if we move forward, these are being enforced. If we don't, these ordinances really don't mean anything.
Well, you have adopted the standard traffic code and the standard offense code. So you have those on the books now, and there's a lot of laws in there apart from your own sort of civil code.
The standard ones, but I mean there are some we've gone out of our way to actually draw up, kind of a tailor-made solution that fits us here. And if we've gone to that trouble, I would like to think that we would also go to the trouble of making sure they're enforced.
The linchpin of your code book is the fact that there are penalties attached to violation of it, and without those, or somebody to do it, it's
Worthless.
Why should they care?
Yeah. So I guess I see what you're saying, Rex, and you're absolutely right. This is, once we commit to doing this, this is not going to be a small thing. It is going to be a large cost going forward. But the other way I look at it too is it's a cost we've budgeted a not insignificant amount for so far. I mean, we've budgeted over $50,000 for 2012. This year we haven't spent anything. Next year the budget was already over 70. And if we're going to the trouble of budgeting that and taxing for that service, we need to provide it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's where the waters have been muddied, is we have the difference between the code enforcement and the law enforcement. And every time we've had an ordinance come before us that would fall under law, we've said, who's going to enforce it? And so maybe if we saw a list of those actual ordinances, and we can go through our books if we've kept them up to date, but that might help in making that decision.
Yeah, again, it may be separated out. Again, kind of the roles and responsibilities of each of those positions, be it the code enforcement officer, the law enforcement, or animal control. Again, kind of whose roles, what the roles and responsibilities of each of those positions are, and what various city codes and ordinances each would be responsible for enforcing.
I feel like we need to do something. I mean, right now, if somebody wants to go 90 miles an hour down Main Street, nobody's going to bother them. If you want to put your go-kart up here on the street and run 100 miles an hour with it, speed's not the only thing, but it's the issue of safety for other people too. But there's nobody to do anything about it. If they want to ride them all night long. And that's just a couple instances. Who says if we have a problem here in town and you call 911 at the county and they're clear at the far east or west end of the county, they have to sit here and wait on them to get here. I feel like we need to do something. And I don't disagree with me. We may need to watch our P's and Q's on setting the whole thing up, budgetary-wise. But I feel like we need to make some kind of a step to start this process. If I'm like Matt, we have the ordinances, and if we're not going to do them, then we might as well take those books off the shelf, throw them away, forget it. Ed, I have a question for you on this application process. Would you be looking for somebody that already has like the Kansas law enforcement training?
Certainly.
Okay, what does it cost to go through that academy, and how long does it take? Do you remember from previous experiences?
Yes, I do. The Law Enforcement Academy is free. A small portion of each citation written across Kansas goes towards funding the Law Enforcement Training Academy. What our expenditure is on a brand new officer is already accounted for in large part through the budgetary process that I've shown you, because we're purchasing a complete issue of uniforms, for example. But to take a brand new young man or young woman and put them in the academy, we're on task for their complete pay and benefits during the time that they're away, as well as outfitting that officer with equipment. So in essence, and I know there's a lot of candidates out there who would be very good for this, but we're accepting up front that they'd be away at the very next available training cycle for the academy. for roughly 12 weeks.
So, okay.
So
4
in
months.
essence, a fresh candidate that doesn't already have that certification isn't costing us any more money, it just costs us some time.
Cost us some time.
Unless, once that candidate comes out of school, comes to work for a month, gets a better offer, and goes away. We start over again, right?
Yes,
So
we do.
therefore, the money we paid that person, we got him, we paid him to get educated. And now, so what I'm getting at is, can this applicant, are you going to make it maybe a requirement that they have this training?
Yes.
Okay.
I would prefer to do that up front because a previously certified law enforcement officer already has half of what we're looking for.
Okay.
We need to find that applicant who also has a strong administrative background as well. And I think that's going to be very, very difficult to have the right qualified person. There's a lot of people out there with prior law enforcement experience, and the questions to overcome is, why did you leave your previous employer? And to address part of what you had said earlier, the Law Enforcement Training Act requires that if an officer leave here to take another law enforcement job within a 2-year time frame of graduating, that city is then on task to pay us the expenditures for outfitting and training that officer.
I see. Okay.
So there is some incentive for them to stay at least 2 years as a brand new officer. I think, go ahead, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we'd be miles ahead if we did have an acceptable candidate who is already certified as an active law enforcement officer in Kansas.
I had, in our meeting that we had last Monday night, we talked about a vehicle that you could get through from the Highway Patrol. Yeah. I still feel like if we're going to do a vehicle, we should look at a pickup, just for like your animal control issues. And does not the Highway Patrol, like we have a local DOT officer that works for the Highway Patrol, that lives here in town. I understood they're starting to turn those vehicles also.
Right.
So could we look into that also, rather than, I think an officer in town here would be better off with a pickup than a car.
Yeah, you want 2 gear shift levers.
Yeah.
And they have Tahoes. I mean, there's different choices other than just a Charger or
Sure.
a Crown Vic.
Well, to me, the Charger, Ed, that's fine and dandy, but to me, that looks like we're set up for a high-speed chase. We've only got, what is it, a mile through town here right quick?
That's the fun part, though.
Well, when you hit some of them dips on Bay Street in a high-speed chase,
Or somebody else's kid driving down the street.
yeah. But I just feel like we'd be better suited to have either an SUV pickup type deal rather than a car.
Especially if you're hauling out animals. You do
Exactly.
something like that, yeah.
I'd agree. I think that's the type of detail, though, we can work out once we decide to establish. I think really the first thing we need to decide is, do we do this or not?
I understand that, but there's just some other things to look at in the decision-making process, whether,
I think it needs looked at, full-time or not, that, I can see where the code enforcement guy and the dog guy and a police officer might be busy the first 30 days, but once the word's out, I think it's gonna get pretty slow. I don't think we're that bad or criminalistic a town.
The other people, the code enforcement and the animal control, they are underneath the police officer, correct?
Animal control, not code
But
enforcement.
the code enforcement is not.
Code enforcement's going to be more or less working for the city administrator and the city
Okay.
clerk, who
Okay.
has an active hand. Christie has an active hand on what's going on with abatement processes and codes,
Okay.
building codes.
the code enforcement is more in the building process and abatements, things such as that.
Right,
It's a
Really,
building inspector / code enforcer.
Right.
right. And I might add, council, I've only had one application for that so far.
I would guess, just if I were to do a quick and dirty distinction between the code and law enforcement, code enforcement officer is primarily concerned with property, whereas the law enforcement is primarily concerned with people.
And traffic.
And cars, yeah.
And Councilmember Butler, I spoke to the sheriff for about 2 hours. And during that conversation, he was quite clear that he has no interest in renewing a contract and having any involvement with enforcing city code whatsoever. During that conversation, I think he was appreciative of the fact that I did have the law enforcement background, and he said that he's willing to get behind an initiative for a Greensburg Police Department 100% because he's confident that if we began that process, I would be able to ensure that it's going to work effectively, not only for the city, but for the county as well. He's confident that this would be set up correctly. And that's a good vote of confidence from our sheriff. But if we were to delay any further, I'll add this, I'd certainly go and visit with him again. I have no problem with that. To confirm, for example, if we increased any amount, would he be interested in enforcing codes? I think we have a need to enforce minor traffic violations that the county's not going to take a part in. And I think there's a need to enforce some ordinances, for example, our special purpose vehicles that the sheriff's deputies probably aren't that interested in enforcing. Certainly animal control, and it would need to be a conscious decision under the part of the city if we wanted an animal control officer with very little training and knowledge of law to be able to write citations, or whether we have our officer do that. Even if it's a report from an animal control officer on a Friday night that the officer is now seeing Monday morning and he mails a ticket to the recipient. And then he would have to testify in our municipal court that I wrote that citation based on the report generated by our animal control officer, documenting a violation of city ordinance. And then both would, of course, be subpoenaed into court. I'm confident that the sheriff has no interest in doing a law enforcement contract, but I haven't visited with him about any desire, if there is such a desire on the city's part, to increase the contract. I'm very confident that he has no interest in enforcing municipal code, but do we have a price? I don't want to enforce code at $53,000, but maybe $73,000. I don't know. My guess is no.
If we're going to have to increase our money to the county to $70-some thousand, I'd just assume we spend it ourselves and do it ourselves.
Yeah, that you're in the same ballpark of running our own police department
Exactly.
at that price, and
Yeah.
that's more directly under our
Because I
control.
feel that at that point, they're still going to pick and choose
What they
the
do.
calls they want to take.
The underlying problem of the sheriff enforcing the criminal codes is that every time they have a contact with somebody, it's a voter. Whereas a police department, it's a perpetrator. And that's why sheriffs don't like necessarily to have to deal with any more of that than they have to.
Well, see, and they didn't before. They hated that dog catching, and I can see that. That was their big issue before.
Just an opportunity to usually make somebody mad that
Yeah.
remembers.
But Rex, it was part of the contract with them.
Yeah, but they never did. The city always provided the guy.
I know, but I don't care how bad they hated it. It was part of the contract that we wrote with them.
So, I'd be curious if they're not playing dog catcher, and then I hope they're more clear on between ordinances, municipal codes, and laws than I am. It gets, like Erica said, kind of muddy to me.
Well, getting back to Matt's suggestion, could we get a list of the ordinances that the police officer's duties would fall under versus the ordinances that the code enforcement person would fall under? Partly because I know we'll be questioned by the public. And in order to justify that this is a position that's needed,
I would hope the public would have some input.
There have been lots of comments in the last few months that I've heard and overheard from the public, mostly concerning some of the codes that we have initiated. And their biggest concern is, well, I remember what they've said is, what's the point of making, of adopting that ordinance when you don't have anybody to enforce it anyway? And who do we call if we need to have somebody come out and enforce it? There's nobody to do that. And I've heard that from quite a few people, so for me, this is kind of important.
But the police officer won't have anything to do with that.
He will to a point.
Well, it depends on
It
specific.
depends on the ordinance.
Yes. If it's an ordinance or, yes.
It's very muddy water, I know.
Okay, for instance, the one lady that had the comment just the other day, she was complaining that there was somebody out there running around with a four-wheeler and they're making all kinds of noise and they're stirring up dirt and all this kind of stuff. And she said, it doesn't do me any good to call anybody because they won't come and do anything about it.
Whose job would that be?
That's your
The
city
police.
officer.
The sheriff, the police officer.
Police officer.
So then the next comment that I hear is, okay, so you have a pit bull that lives next door, and he's out of his cage, and he comes over into your yard, and there's little kids playing there. Who do I call? Do you call your...
Call everybody.
Everybody. That's right.
Everybody.
Don't call anybody, get your gun.
But this lady was saying, and rightfully so, right now, there is nobody that can come and help her, because the city doesn't have anybody to come out there to help them, and
The county won't.
the county doesn't want to have anything to do with that.
I've got two state steppers that says that you call 911, say you've got a vicious animal in your yard, I don't care if they got a contract or not, I'll bet they're there.
I'm not saying they aren't.
If they're
I'm
not,
just
they're not
saying,
much of a cop period to start with.
I know, I'm not saying that they wouldn't come. I'm just saying that this lady, that's the way they see it. That we don't have anybody to enforce that law or that code. They would, that's what they say.
And it also depends on the circumstance. If the dog's not actively threatening anyone, it's not a vicious dog.
But in their opinion, it's a pit bull, and so
Exactly.
it's vicious, in their opinion. So,
So tonight, we need to decide whether we want to move forward with this or table it or forget it completely. Correct?
And it's gonna be an annual budget of so far what?
2013 is 72. 2014 is 87. Don't quote me on that. The cost of insurance could go up. If this officer is doing a bang-up job, we're probably going to give him a merit increase. So in today's numbers, with our 72 budget for 2013, it should go up minimally by itself from 13 to 14. But we already understand what our sheriff has said for $15,000 dispatch service fee.
And then we need to add a setup fee to that.
I'm sorry?
Then we need to, that 72,000 and 2014, those two numbers, that reflect setting it up also. That's the whole thing, bullet, guts and feather, cards, leather, uniform, firearms, insurance, bonds.
That's all equipment issues down to paperwork and office supplies needed for setup is accounted for in the 2012 budget.
New computer so you can do the NCI, whatever.
An existing computer so we can have some cost savings.
Make sure that's wrote down. For the next through 2014.
But I see, other than the stated dispatch fee in 2014, it should be very minimally increased. And that's for just normal increases from year to year that we're experiencing in all other categories now anyway, when dealing with personnel. Merit increases, should council be able to vote for that. Cost of insurance, and the cost of the insurance, for example, as you had mentioned earlier, is much higher than it would be for a lineman or nearly any other position in town. But that's been accounted for by our insurance representative. Ms. Hassipin has quoted me some numbers, and that's what I've plugged into to the projected budget. I just one more point. I will say that, certainly not a problem should this be tabled or whatever council chooses, but I will say going forward that with the myriad of duties required to begin to set this up and the availability of funding necessary to set that up, I would request that, should there be a vote of confidence on something like this, we do it as quickly as possible so that we would have time to allow a newly hired person to be able to go through this process and purchase what equipment is necessary still yet in this budget cycle.
I guess just for myself, I'm in favor of moving forward on it, but by the same token, this is a big commitment that we're making, and I'm also all in favor of just gathering all information, making sure we know exactly what we're getting ourselves into and exactly what the costs are going to be and exactly what the responsibilities of the officer would be. So I'm also perfectly fine with, stepping back. And just to touch on your time constraint concern, Ed, there's no reason we could probably just encumber those funds and spend them in 2013 if the time frame kind of pushed it out a little farther. I think that would, and we do have a fairly specific itemized list of so much for a vehicle, so much for equipment, that I don't think there's a reason we couldn't encumber funds for that purpose if we weren't able to get that done in these last couple months of this year. Gordon,
You could earmark them,
yeah, just encumber them and
they're carryover.
yeah.
With a required budget adjustment towards at least sometime during the next budget year.
Yeah. Probably want to talk to your auditors about exactly how you want to handle that. That's what I do.
I'm not sure you'd have to do a budget adjustment for encumbered funds.
Well, good
I'm
point.
not sure. I just
Definitely something to ask the auditors.
ask the auditor. They can walk you through how to do it right, and you won't have any problems.
And I know that something needs to be done. I'm just not for sure full-time as much money a year. So, you're right. So if we either do it or erase the laws.
I guess I don't understand, Rex, how you have a part-time police officer.
Well, I don't know. I don't know that it's been explored. Evidently, some of the towns are having issues. I read in a Hutch paper where one of them's quitting their police force.
I think part of that is exactly what's going on in the city of Nickerson. Their article was in the Hutch paper. Their full-time chief had stepped down. They have several reserve officers, but it's felt that was going to be inadequate to what they envisioned their law enforcement needs were. So I have maybe that same concern. Part-time law enforcement, you may have part-time results. And we're already going to have part-time results anyway. You just can't cover a 24/7 police department with one officer.
And it's good to have one, but there's going to be times when you get somebody running 90 miles an hour down the street and they don't get caught, because it just happens.
But you want to get people out of the habit of running 98 miles an hour down Main Street, which the chance that they actually will get caught when the officer's on duty hopefully will deter them from doing that. Plus their house is on fire.
Their house was on fire.
The citizens can help themselves a lot if they just would. We're getting more dependent on somebody else to do our thinking for in our government. We want our government to take care of everything instead of doing it ourselves. Calling in a complaint, or how can I help do this, or maybe I need to go talk to my neighbor with a pit bull and tell him, hey,
That dog in my leash.
keep him in the fence, or
So is the consensus then that we want to table this thing here until we gather some more information?
the only thing I'm like Eric, I would like to see a paper that shows the differentiation between a
Responsibilities.
police officer and the responsibilities between a police officer, a code enforcement officer, that animal control kind of takes care of itself.
To me, the codes and ordinances are two different things. Am I correct on that?
I think those words are interchangeable.
See, that's what.
Okay,
A city
that's
code-
why I'm asking.
A city code is an ordinance.
Okay.
An ordinance is a city code. Depends. I've used them interchangeably. And The term code enforcement officer, however, is simply for those health and comfort codes that make us have a more healthy or safe environment. And I picture that as everything from the curb to the house, on private property. And that's an abatement process that council or a judge has to be involved in. For violations of law, either traffic or criminal law or anything like that, the code enforcement officer has nothing to do with that, nothing whatsoever, as far as traffic and violations of criminal law. And typically an officer has no involvement with anything on private property. I think that requirement for a person's home as their castle gets so much stronger when you're dealing with a police officer. I mean, it takes probable cause that a crime is either being committed or has been committed on private property so that an officer can go do that. Whereas for a code enforcement officer, it's fairly clear to them that there's a violation of city code already if they can see the open basement, or if they can see the grasses that are in excess of 12 inches, or things of that nature. But code enforcement is going to be enforcement of codes on private property that are violations of our health code, for example, or our environmental code, whereas a police officer has nothing to do with that. So I understand completely, counsel. I mean, and I can return with a good job description for each one of them, which is a necessary step in our personnel manual. We would have to have good job descriptions for each one of those positions. So it has to be put together at some time in the future. I'll prepare those and return with that to council.
Do we need a motion for that? Or do we
Well, I would like to move forward on it,
Yeah.
but my hands are tied tonight, right? So I can't.
Well, again, I'm in favor of moving forward as well, but again, it is, a big step the city's taking, establishing a new department. So if we're doing it, we might as well take our time and make sure we do it right.
I agree.
So I would be comfortable, allowing another few weeks to again, get some clearly defined roles, responsibilities for each of our potential enforcement officers, and then moving forward, at our next meeting or whenever that information is compiled.
So in essence, that is a table then, right, for right now?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I'm fine with that. And in the meantime, we can, again, continue talking with our neighbors and other citizens just to get their feedback and their thoughts on what our enforcement needs are.
Thank you, counsel.
Is that the consensus of everybody else?
Yeah.
All right.
It is.
And if the citizens want to call the city administrator and weigh in with their opinion, your phone number is
2751.
723-2751.
And I would welcome an opportunity to visit with citizens about a Greensburg Police Department.
Item C. The proposed styles of signage for the Fleener Beck Memorial.
Council, what we've included in your packet is some black and white photographs that Ms. Stacy Barnes had given me. This is in furtherance of previous discussions we've had in the area of the Fleener Beck Memorial sculpture. So in part, this is a process to potentially put a sign up in the area where the sculpture is fairly close to the sidewalk. The primary purpose of the signage is to further educate our visitors on the Fleener Beck Plaza itself and the artist who was able to make this sculpture for us. In working with Christy today, we had decided that instead of having our audience not have a clue what we're talking about, we decided to put it up on the overhead so that you can see it. It's working.
It's a privilege today.
You can see this. So 2 points behind bringing this up, council, is asking your input on whether the particular style of signage that's going to be displayed and it has been presented in your packet, which style of signage is more acceptable for what our plaza looks like, as well as some dialogue on the location. I think more or less just confirmation that it would be a good fit to put it near the area where the sculpture is close to the sidewalk.
I think that would be probably.
You know what, when we looked at that, there's plenty of room, you can screw that base even down to the concrete by it. It's just which would be safer, you know, if a kid would duck around underneath that sign, which would be safer, one at an angle or one straight up?
Well, and which type of sign, an angle or straight, is going to fit best around that sculpture, too.
And I think this post, in this particular layout, we can have it a little taller or a little shorter to fit whichever scenario we need out there. So having said that, this is the style of sign that is more or less just leaned back away from the reader. Christy, go ahead and go to the next one.
I think they said that was ADA compliant too.
ADA compliant.
Which means it's low enough you can.
That someone in a wheelchair can read it.
Yeah.
So it'd be down fairly low then, probably.
Like this,
Yeah.
from what that picture showed.
And conversely, this one is, it's got to be ADA compliant because you can read the low print, whereas maybe other folks would have to maybe cause some back strain to get down there to read that. I don't know.
Neck strain.
So really our choices here are whether we would prefer it to have a little bit of an angle away from the reader or whether we would prefer the upright or straight up and down type of signage. And this is a little misleading on the third photograph because it has the same photo as page 2 on the bottom right, the Longhorn Cattle Arrive. So in essence, I guess we're asking council, since we do have the requirement for a lot of text on there, whether we would prefer the sign leaning away from the reader or one that's straight up and down in that scenario.
Just from a purely aesthetics point of view, I kind of prefer the lectern style, the angle, but that's not knowing the relative costs either, so.
And we don't want to take nothing away from the sculpture either by having a big sign in front of it.
That's true.
I prefer, I'm like Matt, I prefer the sloped lectern type.
I have a question. Did you consult with the artist about this?
You know, I'm not sure the answer to that. I'm pretty sure Stacy has, but I'd have to confirm that.
This is an artist, that's a beautiful sculpture, a beautiful piece of it.
Well,
Which I would accept.
Where we're
I don't
thinking,
know if he would.
where we're thinking about though, it's kind of going to be on the side of the sculpture, isn't it?
But at the end of it.
Yeah, at the end,
Not in front of it.
not in front of it.
We have an issue there and we're trying to use the sign to help us take care of two things at once.
Right, and we have some signage on the back side of it that already tells a little bit about what this plaza is for. Maybe a location that's kind of angled in to the memorial, kind of angled in a little bit, that's on the south side, closer to the Big Well building. It would really be good information to know what the artist thinks about the location as well.
Yeah, I personally don't like any of these choices. And that was my question too. Has anyone consulted with the artist on this? Because that is a beautiful sculpture that he's designed, and I personally would be very offended if I designed something that has such a prominent place in a community and then you go slap an attractive sign up in front of it.
You vote none of the above.
Also, is
Sculpture's this way. We're scared about kids
Right.
underneath here.
I know what we're talking about. How much dialogue is going on it? And has the Fleener Beck family, have they come up with the dialogue, or have they been part of that dialogue?
They have definitely been a part of it. Stacy's working with them to pare down what Mr. John Fleener had been able to cite as far as the entire family. The entire heritage was read by Mr. Fleener at the dedication. It will show the immediate family that's lived there, I think, since the Fleeners and Becks owned that piece of property. I think that's part of her thought process. And then on a secondary panel, information about the artist. So at this time, I know Stacy's working on the dialogue. I've seen the dialogue, and I apologize, it was just handwritten. I don't have a copy for council.
And the family doesn't have a problem with a sign up there of any kind?
So far, I think they're very supportive of it. And the concept is a good one. We want to provide additional information about the Fleener Beck family. We're in the process of trying to figure out exactly what that's going to be in order to pay tribute to the family that worked with us on this plaza. And of course, with the secondary focus of information about the artist and the sculpture itself. If council is okay with that, we can certainly bring the text back in here to show you what that finalized text is going to read. Once it's on there, that's it.
Literally in stone, maybe.
Well, and personally, yeah, that's what I think I'd rather see is something like in granite, you know, with it engraved in it. I think that would be much more aesthetically pleasing to go with what's there. But yeah, I think that artists should definitely be consulted before we go slapping anything up there.
Well, I mean, at the very least, if we're going to be telling his story, I think chances are he may want to supply that.
Maybe any pictures on there, or, yeah.
So, but again, I'm fine with the sign there, but I'm also fine with exploring other options. Of the ones presented, that would be my favorite, but I don't really have an eye for these things, so definitely would defer to Aaron Hayes.
To me, this is easier to read, the lecture and yeah, that word, I can't say it right now. But yeah, that one is easier to read, in my opinion.
I think part of the process, Councilmember Goodman, is that this is luminous neon, I believe, and you're limited in that company for what they have available. And in that company, I believe it's signage like this. Maybe
what do we have left in the budget for this?
Yeah, what can the big wheel afford?
Christie?
Right now, isn't there like 32,000 left or 36,000 left for everything that we want to do over there? So.
Well, is there a list of other things in addition to the signage which that money will go towards?
Stacy's been trying to prepare, she's had several suggestions for USDA and they have turned her down on a lot of things.
Really?
They will not fund a lot of things that she wants over there. She's going to get a display case, so that will come out of there. She needs an additional display case. They will not fund some of the things that were in the big well at the time of the storm, like the penny press and different things that were in there. They won't fund that. They don't see that as fixtures. So there's been some things she suggested that they will not fund. So we're kind of trying to stay within their scope of the project, which has made some things interesting. But they're okay with signage. They thought that was a great idea. They're okay with some things if we needed to do some things in the park area on the site and fixtures such as display cases. But
yeah, and Luminous has done great work for us in the past, but they're not the only sign company that's out there. So
I'll work with Stacy and see if we can bring more ideas and maybe see if we can formalize what the concept is for the text if we've got artist and family approval on that, and allow council to see that as well.
I'll bet $1,000 would use up that 30,000. Going by what headstones cost, I know.
well,
Okay, so then
there's got to be something better looking than that.
We'll wait for some more options to be brought before us on this, then different styles possibly,
All right.
some different costs maybe.
Okay.
See what Stacy comes up. Item D, special meeting for Monday, October 22nd, to meet with representatives from H.W. Lochner for an update on our development of the airport.
Council, I believe that Lochner is going to bring someone with them from KDOT, which I think is a really good step on their part. So in case KDOT needs to answer questions that Lochner can't at this point. The plan is finalized. My point of contact, Mike Waller at Lochner, spoke to me today on the phone. It's his intent to submit the finalized plan down here via UPS. It should arrive, I'm thinking, in the next couple of days. and I'll have that available for council to be able to examine that through the weekend, so that you'll have the background information prior to the requested special meeting.
So what we need then is a motion possibly then.
Yeah.
Well, I would make a motion that we call a special meeting for 6 o'clock, Monday, October 22nd, for the purposes of discussing the airport development plan with H.W. Lochner.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to approve a special meeting for 6 p.m. Monday, October 2nd with H.W. Lochner for the development of the new airport. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. City Attorney's report.
No report.
Oh, come on.
When there's no report, do you work for free?
In that portion, yes.
So we got 10 seconds for free, right?
I am not charging you for a report tonight.
Executive session.
You didn't hire a stupid attorney, did you?
Do we need any executive sessions?
I believe we do, for matters of attorney.
I thought, Ed, maybe we just talk generally about the topic to see if they want to have it, and then we could have it in more detail. And the other, Ed and I have talked about, and Christie's done some work gathering information about whether the city wants to consider bidding in at the tax sale. There's a tax sale scheduled for the 23rd, I believe it is, a week from tomorrow. And there are properties that have been troublesome to the city in the past, that there may be some merit for the city doing something to try to acquire those by bidding in and then getting credit for the amount of some of the taxes are yours. Any county ad valorem taxes, a portion of it would relate to the city, and then some of them are your assessments that you've made over time, so that you could use that to bid if you wanted to do that. And so if you have an idea that you might want to do that, we could talk about it in executive session with respect to the possibility of acquiring real estate as attorney-client if you wanted to do that. The other thing I wondered, one of the things that happens with these tax sales is, especially properties that maybe have some value, is people come in at the end and redeem them. They have until 5 o'clock the day before the sale to redeem them. And so we might spend a lot of time redeeming property, or talking about that, and then we've wasted it because it's not going to be available. The other thing we could do is give council the information, and then maybe I didn't know if you wanted me to be here on next week. I wouldn't mind seeing that discussion about the airport plan.
Good.
But we could have an executive session Monday night if you want to about that tax issue. We would know then what is going to be there and what isn't going to be there, and you could decide. Stacy's got good information together on it. I mean, sorry, Christie.
I will.
Did you hire a stupid lawyer? Yeah, just old. Yeah, we hadn't talked about that, but as I was looking at that and thinking about you guys trying to decide tonight anyway, if you hadn't really seen that information and thought about it.
So what you're suggesting is, Gordon, we wait till our meeting on the 22nd after it's over, maybe to have an executive session and
we could
assess that situation and see what's maybe still available.
Tell you what's there, and then you could talk about it. And then, is that all right with you, Ed?
I think so.
I don't know how long that meeting the 6 o'clock was going to last, or if they have any.
Is there any activity we would need to take on, any land initiative prior to the 23rd? Is that, like you had mentioned, we'd be able to put in some information with the county as far as a city bid?
Yeah, I mean, we could still talk to the county also anyway about, they meet next Monday?
Not today. Today was their, they met today, was their regular meeting.
Yeah, we wouldn't have anything about it anyway with them, but, yeah, I guess there's really nothing we could have done there. We were going to talk about, maybe talking to them about whether or not there's some way to work together on some of those things. And I don't know, did they decide anything about whether they were bidding anything in those?
I don't know that if they did or not. I'm going to guess probably not. That hasn't been their past
Okay. Usually when I've had those sales, I've asked the county commission, do you want to bid or not bid? Because sometimes they do want to. They bid in the amount of their taxes. That way they can guarantee they get that. And if they think the property's worth that much or more, they'll do that. If it's a dog that's going to be a problem, they just let it, whatever happens in the market happens. And then, but if somebody bids over the taxes, then let them have it.
On a deal like that, on a piece of property, if the city had $1,000 lien and they buy it, do they still pay $1,000, or does the lien come off the purchase price?
If somebody buys the property, that money goes to the county, and then the county allocates it to amongst all of the ad valorem tax assessors. The school district, the cities, the county itself, the cemeteries, you know, whoever taxes that piece of property, they get their proportionate share. And if it gets all of it, they'll get all their money back. And if it's less than all, then they won't get it. So it's, but the main thing is, you've had a number of problems with properties that have cost you more than they're worth, really. And just whether you want to, there may not end up being an opportunity with it, but there might be some that you might say, let's do it. And then there's also the potential for economic development possibilities with some of these properties also. Cleaning up a blighted area yourself, or having something that somebody else would want. So it's however you want to do it. We could talk tonight, or we could wait until we know for sure. That's my worry. When I saw some of those values, some of them are appraised pretty high, and I'm thinking, surely somebody will show up and buy them.
Definitely, I think it's something we want to explore. So, like, by Monday night, if we have a list of the properties that will be coming up for sale, also an idea of maybe budget-wise, what we might be able to afford to dedicate towards, acquiring property, then just come up maybe with a priority list of those properties coming up, which ones would we want to put in a bid on.
And Ed can give, he has an information packet there with some of that stuff.
Right. And I think for the most part, that's public information anyway.
Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah.
So, but I am fine discussing it at our special meeting next week.
I think you could give it to him after the meeting.
Okay. We're going to discuss it next week and add it here.
Yeah, that's another thing is that.
Yeah, well, yeah, if we're going to discuss it at the special, we can cover those together. So it'll be on the council's agenda.
We can discuss that in attorney-client because it's the potential for acquiring real estate.
Do they need a motion to add that to the agenda since their motion was just to talk to Walker?
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt to have it to consider, purchases of property, what the city might do at the tax sale. Doesn't hurt. I don't.
Well, I would make that motion then that we add into the agenda for city client, or for, let me say if I can
Special
get this
meeting.
right. Special meeting next week. Look at the tax sale and a possibility of bidding in on any of the property.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to add to the agenda of our special meeting of October the 22nd concerning tax properties for sale within city limits of Greensburg. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. So then we don't need any other executive sessions in tonight, as far as
I don't think so, no.
Is there any other business? If not, call the meeting adjourned.